When Sarah first noticed her mother forgetting simple things, where she'd placed her keys, names of longtime friends, what day it was, she didn't think much of it. Just normal aging, right? But within months, these small lapses evolved into something far more serious. At 42, Sarah found herself making the hardest decision of her life, moving back into her childhood home to care for her mother with advancing dementia. What she didn't realize was how quickly her own identity would begin to dissolve. "I remember sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., Sarah told me, sobbing because I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked how I was doing. Not how Mom was doing. How I was doing. I'd become invisible. Even to myself, it rarely happens overnight. That's what makes the caregiver journey so insidious. For most of us, it's like being slowly boiled alive. You don't notice the temperature rising until you're already cooked." Sarah's story is one I've heard countless times in my work with family caregivers. She didn't wake up one morning and suddenly find herself completely consumed by her mother's care. It happened in small increments. First, it was just helping with groceries and doctor appointments. Then, medication management. Then bathing assistance. Then round-the-clock supervision. And somewhere along that trajectory, Sarah stopped being Sarah, daughter, marketing executive, amateur photographer, friend, and became simply Mom's caregiver. "I used to have this ritual," she explained. "Every Saturday morning, I'd grab my camera and spend 3 hours at the botanical gardens. Photography was my oxygen. But when Mom needed more care, those Saturday mornings were the first thing to go. I told myself it was temporary. 3 years later, my camera was still collecting dust in the closet. This gradual identity erosion is something almost every family caregiver experiences. Research shows that over 40% of family caregivers suffer from depression, and it's not hard to understand why. When your entire existence becomes measured by medication schedules, doctor appointments, and whether someone else ate enough or slept well, your sense of self begins to fade like an old photograph left in the sun. For Sarah, the breaking point came unexpectedly. It wasn't during one of her mother's difficult days or medical emergencies. It was during a rare moment of clarity. Mom was having a good day, Sarah recalled. She looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Honey, you look so tired." What happened to that girl who used to laugh all the time? And something in me just cracked open. Because my own mother, despite her cognitive decline, could see what I couldn't, that I was disappearing. That night, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She called her best friend from college and just talked. Not about caregiving or her mother's condition. About herself. About how lost she felt. About how she couldn't remember the last time she'd done anything purely for her own enjoyment. I realized I'd been holding my breath for 3 years, she said. And finally, I was allowing myself to exhale. This moment of recognition is crucial in the caregiver journey. It's that instant when you acknowledge that martyrdom isn't sustainable, that slowly erasing yourself isn't actually helping anyone, including the person you're caring for. One of the most challenging aspects of Sarah's story, and something many of you watching will relate to, is navigating family dynamics while caregiving. Sarah has 2 brothers who lived out of state. And while they were quick to offer opinions about their mother's care, they were notably absent when it came to providing hands-on help. "I didn't get these calls," Sarah explained, where my brother would say things like, "Have you tried that new memory care technique I sent you an article about?" Or, "Mom sounded confused when I called her yesterday." And I wanted to scream, "Yes, I've tried everything." And maybe she sounded confused because you only call once a month and she doesn't remember who you are anymore. The resentment that builds in these situations is completely natural. Studies show that in most families, the caregiving responsibility falls disproportionately on one person, typically a daughter or daughter-in-law. And yet, those not in the trenches often feel entitled to equal input on care decisions. For Sarah, learning to navigate these dynamics without allowing them to consume her emotionally was a critical part of reclaiming her identity. "I had to accept that my brother's relationship with Mom was different from mine," she said. "They were doing what they could from a distance." Was it equal? No. Was it fair? Absolutely not. But holding on to that anger was only hurting me. Sarah developed what she calls her broken record technique, calmly and consistently repeating the same message. "I appreciate your suggestion. If you'd like to implement it, you're welcome to come stay for a week and try it out." Over time, this boundary-setting approach actually improved her relationship with her brothers. One of them eventually arranged to work remotely for a month to give Sarah a break. The other started contributing financially to help pay for additional in-home care. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of caregiver identity loss is the guilt that accompanies any attempt to reclaim yourself. Sarah described it perfectly. "The first time I hired someone to stay with Mom so I could go take photos for 3 hours, I felt physically ill with guilt. I kept checking my phone. I cut the outing short. I came back and interrogated the caregiver about every minute I'd been gone. It was like I believed that my suffering was somehow a necessary component of Mom's care, that if I wasn't miserable, I wasn't doing enough." This is what I call the caregiver guilt paradox. The more you sacrifice yourself, the more you believe you should be sacrificing. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle that's incredibly difficult to break. For Sarah, overcoming this guilt required a complete reframing of what it meant to be a good daughter and a good caregiver. "I had to accept a difficult truth," she said. "The quality of care I provided was actually better when I wasn't running on empty. When I started taking those 3 hours a week for photography again, I came back more patient, more present, more able to handle Mom's repetitive questions without feeling frustrated." This isn't just anecdotal. Research consistently shows that caregivers who maintain some semblance of their own lives provide better care and are less likely to experience burnout or resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms. The guilt never completely disappears. I think that's important to acknowledge. But it can be managed. It can be put in its proper place, instead of allowed to drive every decision you make. We've all heard the airplane safety instruction: put your own oxygen mask on before assisting others. It's a perfect metaphor for caregiving, but one that's incredibly difficult to put into practice. For Sarah, building a support system was the equivalent of securing her own oxygen mask. This didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen without significant effort on her part. "I had to get over the idea that asking for help meant I was failing," she explained. "That was a huge mental hurdle. I'd been raised to believe that family takes care of family, period. Asking for outside help felt like a betrayal of that value." Sarah started small. She joined an online support group for dementia caregivers that met via Zoom once a week. Just being able to speak openly with people who truly understood her daily reality was transformative. These were people who didn't flinch when I admitted that sometimes I got so frustrated I had to lock myself in the bathroom for 5 minutes, she said. They didn't judge me when I confessed that there were moments, just moments, when I resented my mother. They got it. And that validation alone helped me feel human again. From there, Sarah gradually expanded her support network. She researched and applied for respite care grants available through her state's Department of Aging, connected with a local church program that provided volunteers to sit with seniors for a few hours each week, finally accepted her neighbor's long-standing offer to check in on her mother occasionally, hired a part-time caregiver using funds her brothers contributed. Each of these steps was accompanied by that familiar wave of guilt. But each step also restored a small piece of Sarah's identity. The first time I went to a movie, an actual movie theater, after 3 years of basically house arrest, I cried, she told me. Not during the sad parts of the film. I cried when the lights went down and the previews started, because I suddenly remembered what it felt like to be a person in the world, not just a caregiver. Sarah began what she half-jokingly calls her identity reclamation project about 4 years into her caregiving journey. By this point, her mother's condition had progressed significantly, and Sarah had finally established enough support to create small pockets of time for herself. I made a list, she explained. It sounds simple, but it was actually really emotional. I titled it Things That Made Me Sarah Before. Photography was at the top, of course. But there were other things: reading novels instead of just dementia care books, meeting friends for coffee, even silly stuff like painting my nails or watching bad reality TV shows. Sarah committed to reintroducing one item from this list each month. Not all at once. That would have been overwhelming and unsustainable. Just one small piece of herself at a time. The first month, I just committed to reading fiction again for 20 minutes before bed. That's it. Just 20 minutes of not thinking about mom, not reading about caregiving. Techniques, not worrying about what tomorrow would bring. Those 20 minutes became sacred time. From there, she gradually added back other elements of her pre-caregiving identity. Some had to be modified to fit her new reality, but they still provided essential connections to her sense of self. I couldn't go back to the botanical gardens every Saturday like before, but I could take my camera when we went to the park for Mom's weekly outing. I couldn't join my old book club that met on Wednesday evenings, but I could join an online one that was more flexible. This gradual reclamation process taught Sarah something critical: identity isn't fixed. It evolves. The goal wasn't to return to exactly who she was before caregiving, but to create a new identity that incorporated both her role as a caregiver and her individual personhood. I'm not the same Sarah I was before Mom got sick, she reflected. How could I be? This experience has changed me fundamentally. But that doesn't mean I had to completely disappear. One of the most surprising aspects of Sarah's story, and something I've witnessed in many caregivers who manage to maintain or reclaim their sense of self, is the discovery of unexpected gifts along this difficult journey. As I started to emerge from that all-consuming caregiver identity, Sarah said, I discovered that some parts of me had actually grown stronger. My capacity for patience, my ability to find humor in absurd situations, my appreciation for small moments of connection, these were muscles that caregiving had developed in me. Sarah found that her photography, once she returned to it, had transformed as well. Her pre-caregiving work had focused primarily on landscapes and architectural details. But now, she found herself drawn to capturing intimate human moments: an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench, a father teaching his daughter to ride a bike, the lined face of a woman feeding pigeons. My eye had changed, she explained. I see vulnerability and strength differently now. I notice the beauty in human connection in a way I never did before. This evolution represents something profound about identity that's rarely discussed in conversations about caregiver burnout. The goal isn't just to prevent the complete erasure of self, it's to integrate the caregiving experience into a richer, more complex sense of who you are. For Sarah, this integration happened gradually, as she allowed herself to acknowledge both the losses and the gains of her caregiving journey. "I wouldn't choose this path," she said frankly. "If I could wave a magic wand and have my mom be healthy again, I would do it in a heartbeat. But since that's not an option, I've had to find a way to hold two truths simultaneously. This is incredibly hard, and it has shaped me in ways that aren't entirely negative." As Sarah continued her identity reclamation project, she had to confront one of the most challenging aspects of caregiving: setting and maintaining boundaries. "I had to learn that no is a complete sentence," she told me. That sounds so simple, but for a caregiver, especially a woman who's been socialized to be a people pleaser, it's revolutionary. Sarah began establishing clear boundaries with her brothers, with well-meaning but intrusive neighbors, and even with her mother when possible. These boundaries weren't selfish, they were necessary for sustainable care. "I created non-negotiable time blocks in my calendar," she explained. "Thursday evenings and Sunday mornings became absolutely sacred. I arranged care for Mom during those times, and I guarded them fiercely. At first, I had to fight the urge to justify or explain why I needed this time. Eventually, I realized I don't owe anyone an explanation for needing to exist as a person outside of caregiving." This boundary setting extended to emotional boundaries as well. Sarah developed what she calls her emotional containment practice, a conscious effort to prevent her mother's emotional state from completely determining her own. On Mom's bad days, when she was confused or agitated or accusing me of stealing from her, I had to learn to be present without absorbing all of that emotion, Sarah explained. "I'd tell myself, this is Mom's dementia talking. This is her fear. This is her confusion. I can respond with compassion without taking it all into my own heart." This emotional boundary setting is perhaps the most difficult skill for caregivers to develop, but it's also one of the most essential for preserving your sense of self. I think it's important to acknowledge that Sarah's story doesn't have a neat, Hollywood ending where everything is perfectly resolved. The reality of long-term caregiving is that it requires ongoing vigilance to maintain your sense of self. "I still have weeks where I slip back into that all-consuming caregiver identity," Sarah admitted. "When Mom has a medical crisis or a particularly difficult phase, my carefully constructed balance can collapse pretty quickly. The difference now is that I recognize when it's happening, and I have strategies to pull myself back." This recognition, that maintaining your identity while caregiving isn't a one-time achievement but an ongoing practice, is crucial. It's about progress, not perfection. For Sarah, this ongoing balance includes regular identity check-ins with herself. Every Sunday evening, I take 10 minutes to ask myself, what did I do this week that was just for Sarah? What do I need in the coming week to feel like myself? Sometimes the answers are really small things: a phone call with a friend, 30 minutes to read a novel, a walk alone in the neighborhood. But acknowledging these needs helps me make them a priority. Sarah's journey from complete identity loss to a more balanced existence as both a caregiver and a whole person didn't happen overnight. It required intentional effort, support from others, and a fundamental shift in how she viewed her role in her mother's care. "I wish I could go back and tell my earlier self that martyrdom isn't a sustainable caregiving strategy," she reflected. That disappearing into this role doesn't actually make you a better caregiver. It ultimately makes you a depleted, resentful one. For those of you watching who see yourselves in Sarah's story, who recognize that gradual disappearing act in your own lives, I want to emphasize that it's never too late to begin reclaiming pieces of yourself. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to begin. Start with something small. Make a list like Sarah did. Things that made me before. Choose just one item from that list and find a way to bring it back into your life, even in a modified form. Reach out for support. This might be the hardest step, but it's also the most important. Whether it's family members, friends, community resources, or online support groups like this one, you don't have to walk this path alone. Remember that caring for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. Not just for your well-being, but for the quality of care you're able to provide. You cannot pour from an empty cup, no matter how much you might try. If Sarah's story resonated with you, I encourage you to share your own experience in the comments below. This community understands what you're going through in a way that many others in your life may not. In our next video, we'll be exploring practical strategies for finding and funding respite care, one of the most crucial resources for caregiver self-preservation. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss it. And remember, you were someone before you became a caregiver. That person still exists. They still matter. And they deserve to be seen, most importantly by you. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next video.